The widow. Everyone feared, until a cowboy took her hand. They said Ruth Carter was cursed, her husband dead, her in-laws cruel, her spirit broken. She bore the weight of whispers and fists, day after day, until her name was spoken only in pity or contempt. In Ash Creek, a woman could vanish into silence, and no one would raise a voice for her. But fate has a way of sending strangers when they're needed most. Eli Morgan, a widower cowboy carrying his own ghosts, rode into town that day. He could have passed by as others did. He could have turned his eyes as others did. Instead, he stepped forward. What began as one man lifting a beaten widow from the dirt would grow into something no one in Ash Creek could have imagined. A vow stronger than blood, and a war that would shake the very soil beneath them. The late afternoon sun bled over the horizon, spilling a copper glow across the prairie as Eli Morgan guided his horse down the dirt road into Ash Creek. Dust clung to his boots and the brim of his hat, and the wind carried the scent of hay, sweat, and distant mesquite smoke. He rode slow, like a man who'd traveled too many miles with too many ghosts following behind. Eli was a widower now. Years of hard riding and harder loss had carved lines into his face, and though his shoulders were still broad, they sagged under the weight of memories he didn't speak of. Each hoofbeat echoed hollow in his chest. His wife's laughter, his daughter's voice, gone, leaving him to wander the frontier like a shell of the man he used to be. Ash Creek wasn't much, just a scattering of false front buildings, saloon, livery, a church with a leaning cross, ringed around a wide, dusty street. But even before Eli's horse reached the hitching post by the general store, he knew something was wrong. Shouts cut through the usual quiet. Eli turned his head. In front of the general store, a woman stumbled into the dirt, her dress torn at the shoulder, dust smeared across her cheek. She tried to rise, but a heavy hand shoved her down again. "Stay down, you worthless thing," a man spat. His hat shadowed his face, but the cruel set of his mouth said all Eli needed to know. Another man stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with cold satisfaction. The woman, Ruth Carter, looked no older than 30, but the bruises darkening her arms made her seem aged by suffering. Her hair, once chestnut, hung dull and tangled. The way the townsfolk skirted the scene, glancing but never stepping in, told Eli this wasn't the first time. Whispers stirred the air. "That's Carter's widow. She should have kept her head down. They say she brings misfortune." Eli's jaw tightened. He swung his leg over and dropped to the ground, boots hitting dirt with a solid thud. Ruth tried to rise again, clutching at the hem of her dress, but the taller man shoved her hard enough that she hit the ground with a cry. Something inside Eli snapped. The sight of her crumpled, there, helpless, dragged him backward through time, to the day he lost his own wife. He remembered the fever that stole her breath, the helplessness of watching life drain from someone you loved, the hollow silence that followed. No one had been there for him. And now here was this woman, broken under the heel of men who should have been family. "Enough," Eli said, his voice carrying like a rifle shot across the street. Heads turned. The crowd, which had pretended not to see, now stared. The two men looked up, annoyance flashing into anger. "This ain't your business, stranger," the taller one snarled. Eli stepped forward, his spurs clicking. When a man raises his hand to a woman, it becomes everyone's business. Ruth's eyes lifted to him, wide, fearful, but behind them something else. A flicker, as if she couldn't believe anyone would dare stand for her. The first man lunged, but Eli moved faster. His fist cracked against the man's jaw, sending him sprawling into the dust. The second rushed him, but Eli met him with a sharp elbow and a shove that knocked him against the hitching post. The street fell silent. Only harsh sound of breathing and the rustle of skirts as townsfolk stepped back. Eli stood tall, dust rising around him. He turned to Ruth and extended his hand. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then, trembling, She reached up. Her fingers were small and cold in his. "Come on," he said softly. She rose unsteady on her feet. The bruises on her arms made Eli's gut twist. The fallen men cursed, spitting dirt. "You'll regret this, Morgan." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Maybe. But you won't lay another hand on her." They slunk back, muttering, but their glares promised vengeance. The crowd began to disperse. People went back to their business, though whispers lingered in the air. Eli ignored them. He turned to Ruth. "You hurt bad?" She shook her head quickly, eyes darting like a cornered animal. "No, I'm fine." Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "You're not fine," Eli said. "Come on, you shouldn't be here." But Ruth didn't move. Her hands twisted in her skirt, eyes flickering toward the road that led out of town. Fear, no, desperation burned there. "Please," she whispered, "not here." "They'll see," confused. Eli followed her gaze. Beyond the store, past the churchyard, a narrow trail wound toward the edge of town, where old barns leaned against the prairie. Her lips trembled. "I have to show you something." Eli studied her, then nodded. He led his horse by the reins, walking beside her as she limped down the trail. They passed the last houses, the town fading behind them, until the road narrowed between thickets of mesquite. At last, Ruth stopped before a weathered barn, half collapsed, its roof sagging. She pushed the door open with trembling hands. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of hay and dust. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the soft boards. A small sound broke the silence. A whimper, high and frightened. Eli froze. In the corner, hidden under a blanket of old quilts, a child stirred. Wide eyes peeked out, frightened but curious. "Shh, baby," Ruth whispered, hurrying forward. She knelt and gathered the little girl into her arms. The child couldn't have been more than 4, with tangled hair and dirt-smudged cheeks. The girl clung to her mother, burying her face in Ruth's shoulder. Eli's breath caught. "This is Hannah," Ruth said, her voice breaking. "My daughter." Eli felt the ground shift beneath him. He hadn't known she had a child. "I've kept her hidden," Ruth confessed, tears streaking the dust on her face. "After my husband died, his family tried to take her from me. They said I wasn't fit to raise her, that she was theirs by right. They'd have taken her away, or worse, so I hide her here in this barn. Every day I bring her food, water. Every day I pray no one finds her." Eli stared at the little girl. Hannah peeked at him over her mother's shoulder, her eyes wide, innocent, and afraid. Something inside Eli cracked wide open. He remembered his own daughter, small arms around his neck, soft voice calling Papa. The memory struck like a bullet, sharp and deep. Ruth held Hannah tighter, rocking her gently. "They beat me because I won't give her up." "They'll never stop." The barn was quiet, except for Ruth's broken whispers and the distant cry of a hawk overhead. Eli stood there, dust swirling around his boots, heart pounding. He had walked into town thinking himself a hollow man, but now there was fire in his chest again. He looked at Ruth, at the bruises dark on her skin, at the small child clinging to her like she was the only safe thing left in the world. And Eli knew in that moment that his wandering days were over. Because sometimes a man didn't choose a fight. Sometimes the fight chose him. The prairie stretched wide and lonely as Eli Morgan guided his horse along the rutted track, Ruth and little Hannah riding close behind in his wagon. The wind swept across the grasslands, tugging at Ruth's tangled hair, carrying the faint cry of meadowlarks. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky into a canvas of fire and smoke. Eli's cabin came into view at the edge of a rise, a simple structure of hand-hewn logs and a stone chimney, weather-beaten but sturdy. Smoke curled faint from the chimney where he'd left embers banked earlier that morning. For years, this place had been his refuge from the world, a shelter for a man who'd once thought himself beyond saving. Now, as the wagon rolled to a stop, it was no longer just his. Ruth stepped down carefully, one hand holding Hannah close, the other clutching her ribs where bruises bloomed dark beneath her dress. Eli caught her arm gently, steadying her. His calloused hand was warm, his grip firm but careful, as if he feared she might break. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine sap, leather, and wood smoke. Eli lit a lantern, the glow spilling across the rough-hewn table, the cot against the wall, the shelves lined with jars of beans, dried apples, and coffee grounds. It wasn't much, but it was safe. For the first time in years, Ruth felt walls around her that didn't threaten, that didn't close in with fists and fury. "Sit," Eli said. His voice was steady but softer than it had been in town. He pulled a chair out for her. Ruth sank into it, Hannah climbing into her lap, clinging like a frightened bird. The girl pressed her face against Ruth's breastbone, whispering one word over and over. "Mama, Mama." The sound cut through Eli like a blade and a bomb all at once. His throat tightened. He turned away, busying himself with the kettle, but memory stormed him all the same. He saw another little girl, golden-haired and laughing, running across a meadow behind this very cabin. He saw his wife smile as she set bread on the table, her hand brushing his shoulder with casual affection. Then fever took them both, swift and merciless. Eli had buried them on the hill behind the cabin, marked with 2 weathered crosses he still tended each spring. The echo of Hannah's trembling "Mama" cracked something inside him that he'd thought was sealed in stone. His chest burned, not with grief alone but with something else, something alive. He poured hot water into a basin, fetched a clean cloth, and knelt beside Ruth. "Let me see," he said quietly. She hesitated, shame flickering in her eyes, but at last she loosened the torn fabric of her sleeve. Purple and yellow bruises marred her skin, raw cuts where nails had torn flesh. Eli dipped the cloth and pressed it gently against the wounds. She winced, sucking in a breath. He paused. "Sorry," he murmured. Ruth shook her head. "It's nothing. I've had worse." "That doesn't make it right." Her eyes flicked to him, startled at the firmness in his voice. No man had spoken on her behalf in years. Hannah shifted, watching with wide eyes as Eli tended her mother's wounds. When he finished, he wrapped clean linen around Ruth's arm, his rough hands surprisingly gentle. "You shouldn't have to live like this," he said at last. Ruth's lips trembled. "They say I killed him." Eli looked up. "Your husband." She nodded. Tears welled, sliding down the dirt-streaked curve of her cheek. "When he fell from his horse, they said it was my fault. That I cursed him. That I brought death into their house. Every day since they've beaten me, reminded me I don't belong. That Hannah doesn't belong." Her voice broke raw as a wound. "But I swear, Eli, I loved him. I would have given my life before I'd harm him." Eli's jaw clenched. He believed her. He'd seen lies before, on battlefields, in saloons, in men who'd betray for a coin, but Ruth's pain was honest as blood. Silence settled heavy between them, broken only by the pop of the fire. Hannah's small fingers curled into her mother's dress, eyes drifting shut at last, exhaustion claiming her. Eli rose and fetched a blanket, draping it around Ruth's shoulders. For a moment, he let his hand rest there, steadying her trembling frame. "You're safe here," he said. The words weren't a promise yet. They were a declaration. Ruth closed her eyes, clutching Hannah tighter. For the first time in months, she believed it. but safety is fragile on the frontier. As Eli turned back to stoke the fire, Ruth shifted in her chair, adjusting the blanket. Something slipped from the folds of her dress, a crumpled piece of parchment, stained and torn. It fluttered to the floor. Eli bent and picked it up. "What's this?" Ruth froze, her face drained of color. "It's nothing," she whispered, but her trembling betrayed her. Eli unfolded the paper. The lantern light revealed spidery handwriting, scrawled in haste. He read aloud, "If I do not return, it was no accident. My brothers will silence me before I can tell the truth. The land is not theirs. Beware." It was signed with a name, Samuel Carter, Ruth's husband. The air in the cabin thickened. Ruth buried her face in her hands. "He left it the day before he died," she whispered through her fingers. "I found it hidden in his saddlebag. I've kept it close all this time, but if they knew I had it, they'd kill me, Eli. They'd take Hannah. They'd bury us both in the dust." Eli's hands tightened around the paper. His eyes burned like coals in the firelight. So it wasn't an accident. Samuel Carter hadn't simply fallen. He'd been murdered. And the very men who beat Ruth now had blood on their hands. He folded the letter carefully, slipping it into his pocket. "Ruth," he said, voice low and steady, "you and your girl are under my roof now. And as long as you're here, they won't lay another finger on you." "That's a promise," her breath hitched. She looked at him through tears, disbelief warring with a flicker of hope. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk yourself for us?" Eli turned toward the fire, shadows deepening the lines of his face. "Because once," he said slowly, "I had a wife and a daughter, and I couldn't save them. I won't stand by and watch another family be torn apart when I can still lift a hand." The fire popped, sparks spiraling up the chimney. Outside, the wind keened across the prairie, a lonely sound. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. Ruth bowed her head, tears falling silently. For the first time in years, she let herself believe someone might stand with her, not against her. Eli sat in the chair opposite, watching the mother and child huddled together, his heart heavy yet strangely alive. The ghosts of his past still lingered, but tonight, there was more than grief in the room. There was a bond forming, a fragile thread of trust, stitched with pain, loss, and a promise that could not be broken. And somewhere deep inside Eli Morgan, a fire-long thought dead began to burn again. The next morning broke gray and sullen, clouds hanging low over the prairie like a warning. Eli Morgan saddled his horse in silence, jaw tight, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. He had slept little. The letter from Samuel Carter weighed heavy in his pocket, its words like an ember that refused to burn out. Ruth hovered near the cabin door, Hannah clinging to her skirts. "You can't go," she whispered, her voice raw with fear. "If you tell them what you know, they'll kill you." Eli cinched the girth and swung into the saddle. "If I stay silent, they'll keep beating you. And they'll come for the girl." His voice was calm, but beneath it ran steel. "I'm not letting that happen." He touched his hat brim, gave Hannah a soft nod, then rode out toward Ash Creek. The town looked the same as yesterday, the saloon doors swinging, children kicking dust, women carrying baskets from the store. But there was a shift in the air. Folks leaned on porch posts and watched Eli ride in, their gazes harder now, whispers riding on the wind. "There he is. Protecting her, is he? Fool cowboy, taking in a cursed woman." Eli felt every word like a burr under the skin, but he didn't flinch. He guided his horse straight to the sheriff's office and dismounted. Inside, Sheriff Abel Harper sat behind his desk, boots propped up, hat pulled low. He was a thick man with a gut soft from years of comfort, his badge tarnished. He didn't bother to rise when Eli stepped in. "Well, if it ain't Eli Morgan," Harper drawled, chewing on a toothpick. "Heard you made quite a scene yesterday. Took a liking to Carter's widow, have you?" Eli planted both hands on the desk, leaning close enough that the sheriff had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. "I took a liking to seeing justice done. And justice says, you stop turning your back while men beat a woman half to death." The sheriff snorted. "Justice? You're new to Ash Creek, Morgan. Around here, family's law. Her in-laws are the Carters. Old blood. Old money. What they say goes, they murdered Samuel Carter." Eli shot back, voice low but sharp. "I've got his words in writing. And if you had any spine left, you'd open a case." For a moment, Harper's eyes flickered, but then he leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Letters can be forged. And even if it were true, what's one cowboy gonna do against half this town standing with the Carters? You want advice? Leave her be." Before you find yourself 6 feet under, Eli straightened, his shadow stretching across the sheriff's desk. "I've buried more than you can count. If I go under, I won't go alone." The sheriff's smirk faltered. Still, he waved a dismissive hand. "Get out, Morgan." "Before I lock you up for stirring trouble," Eli didn't argue. He turned on his heel and walked out into the glare of morning, the door slamming behind him. But as he mounted his horse, he knew. The law in Ash Creek was bought and paid for. He couldn't count on Harper. By midday, the rumors had spread like wildfire. In the saloon, in the churchyard, at the wells and wagons, everywhere Eli's name was spoken, it was tied to Ruth's with a hiss. "They say he's cursed now, too. Man's lost his mind, defending her. Mark my words, he'll pay." When Eli returned to the cabin, he found Ruth pacing the floor, Hannah asleep in the corner on a pile of quilts. Ruth's eyes were wild, her hands wringing together. "They'll come for us," she whispered. "You don't understand. This town, it'll swallow us whole. We should leave tonight. Ride north, anywhere." "I can't stay here, Eli." Not with them watching. Eli set his hat on the table, his face calm but unyielding. "If you run, they'll hunt you down. And you'll never stop looking over your shoulder. You want freedom? You have to stand. You have to fight." Her breath caught. She stared at him, trembling. "I don't know how." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "You already have. Every day you refused to give them Hannah. Every day you endured their fists instead of surrendering. That's fighting. Now it's time you let someone fight beside you." The room went quiet. Ruth blinked, tears gathering. But this time they didn't fall from despair. They burned with something fiercer, hope. That evening, Eli lit a fire in the hearth, the glow softening the cabin's shadows. He set bread and beans on the table, poured water into tin cups. Ruth sat opposite him, Hannah curled against her side. As they settled, Eli bowed his head, his hands folded, his voice low. "Lord, bless this food, and bless the hands that made it. Keep us safe through the night, and give us courage for what lies ahead." When he lifted his head, Ruth was staring at him, stunned. "No man's prayed over a meal in front of me since I was a child," she whispered. Her voice trembled as if the memory hurt and healed all at once. Eli didn't answer. He simply passed her the bread. But the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full, alive with something unspoken. Later, after Hannah was asleep, Ruth sat by the fire, staring into the flames. "I never told you," she began softly, "why the Apaches sometimes leave food at my door. or why they've never harmed me, though others in this town can't say the same. Eli looked at her, curiosity flickering. She drew a shaky breath. It was years ago. I was younger, before I married Samuel. There was a boy, no older than Hannah is now. He'd slipped near the river and fallen in. The current was strong, pulling him under. No one else dared to jump. But her voice broke. I couldn't let him drown. I dove in, pulled him out. His mother cried and thanked me in her tongue. Since then, they've treated me as different. Like I earned something I didn't deserve. Eli's brows furrowed. He'd heard whispers of the Apache nearby, a band proud and fierce, quick to strike when wronged. If Ruth had their gratitude, it meant something powerful, something that could shift the balance. He leaned forward. Do you know the boy's name? She nodded slowly. They called him Coda. Eli sat back, the firelight dancing in his eyes. A thread was weaving itself here, connecting Ruth's past to her present, to the storm gathering around them. You saved a life, Eli said quietly. And debts like that don't fade on the frontier. Ruth's lips parted. Do you think they'd stand with us? Maybe, Eli said. If the time comes, maybe they will. The wind rattled the shutters. Outside, the prairie stretched dark and vast, hiding eyes and intentions in its folds. Inside, the cabin's fire burned steady. Ruth sat a little straighter, a little stronger. For the first time, she began to believe Eli's words. They didn't have to run. They could stand. And as the night deepened, Eli Morgan knew the fight ahead was bigger than him, bigger than Ruth. It was about justice on land, where blood and dust remembered everything. The prairie was too quiet that night. The sky stretched dark and endless, clouds swallowing the stars. Inside the cabin, Ruth and Hannah slept on the cot, their breaths steady. Eli sat at the table, sharpening his knife, ears tuned to the hush beyond the walls. Something gnawed at him. The sheriff's refusal, the whispers in town, the Carters wouldn't sit idle. Power never forgave humiliation. They'd come for Ruth, for Hannah, for him. A coyote's howl split the silence. Then came another sound, boots circling where no man had business. Eli rose, hand brushing the rifle by the door. Then the smell hit him. Smoke. He yanked the door wide. Fire leapt against the night. The barn was ablaze, flames clawing high, sparks raining toward the cabin. Ruth! His voice thundered. She startled awake. Hannah clutched to her chest. The orange glow spilled through the windows. They're burning us out, Eli said, grabbing the rifle. He thrust it into Ruth's hands. Hold it tight! Then he ran into the fire. Smoke scorched his lungs as he kicked the stall latch. His horse reared, eyes rolling white. Eli dragged the animal out just as the roof caved behind them in a roar of sparks. He staggered back, coughing, sweat pouring, the barn collapsing into ash. Go, he barked, pushing Ruth and Hannah toward the hill. They stumbled into the prairie, the horse in tow, the rifle trembling in Ruth's grip. From the rise, Eli looked back. The barn was gone, and beyond the inferno's glow, dark figures lingered. The Carters, watching, waiting. Then they melted into the night. They wanted us dead, Ruth whispered. They wanted you silenced, Eli growled. The fire burned until dawn, painting the prairie in red and gold. Eli kept watch through the night, rifle across his lap, while Ruth and Hannah huddled against him. By morning, only smoldering ruins remained. Ash drifted across the yard. Eli paced the blackened ground, then stopped. Tracks. Heavy boots pressed deep in the soot. Broader, better made than Carter boots, polished heels, city boots. Ruth joined him, Hannah drowsy in her arms. "What is it?" "Not your in-laws," Eli said. His jaw tightened. "Pinkerton." Ruth blanched. Everyone knew the name. The Pinkerton Detective Agency, men who rode under no law but money. "But why would they be with the Carters?" she whispered. Eli's eyes swept the horizon. "Because this isn't just about you. It's about land. The Carters don't have the brains to pull this alone. Someone else wants what you've got. And they'll burn the prairie to take it." Ruth clutched Hannah tighter, tears streaking her ash-stained cheeks. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," Eli said, voice hard as stone. "But neither will I." That evening, they buried what little was left. Eli shoveled in silence, sweat and ash streaking his skin. Ruth tried to help, but he stopped her. "Take care of the girl. I'll handle the rest." When the work was done, they stood before the blackened earth. It wasn't just a barn they'd lost. It was safety, livelihood, memory. Yet Eli was a man carved by loss. He would not bow to it. Later in the cabin, Ruth sat by the fire, her face pale in the glow. "Eli," she whispered, "you don't have to do this. They're my demons, not yours." Eli leaned against the wall, rifle within reach. His gaze held hers, steady and unyielding. "I buried my family once. I won't bury another if I can help it." Her lips trembled. A tear slid down her cheek. "You'll die for us." "Maybe," Eli said, "but I'll live for you first." The fire popped. Hannah stirred, murmuring in her sleep. Ruth looked at her daughter, then back at Eli. For the first time, she didn't argue. Outside, the prairie wind carried the smoke far and wide, a warning and a promise. The Carters had struck, but Eli Morgan endured. And now there was more than vengeance in his blood. There was purpose. The Pinkertons' tracks told him plain. The fight was only beginning. The desert night stretched wide and merciless, the silence broken only by Eli Morgan's saddle leather and the steady beat of his horse's hooves. The Carter ranch glowed in the distance, lanterns flickering like a predator's eyes. Eli rode with purpose. His rifle lay across his saddle, jaw tight, eyes cold. Ruth and Hannah waited safe at the cabin. Tonight was his burden alone. The Carters thought themselves kings, but Ruth's husband had uncovered their theft of Apache land. For that, they silenced him. Tonight, Eli would answer for it. When he reached the ranch, shadows moved among the corrals. Men with rifles lingered, voices low and cruel. The main house loomed, its windows glowing. Eli slid from his horse, boots crunching on gravel, rifle in hand. "Carter!" His voice cut the night. Three brothers stepped into the lantern light, eyes hard, hands near pistols. Jonah Carter sneered. "Look who's come to die." "Should have stayed out of it, Morgan." "I'm not here to play," Eli said. "I'm here to finish it." A shot cracked. Eli dove behind a trough, returning fire. Gunfire erupted, echoing across the ranch. Eli dropped a hired hand with a clean shot, smoke thick in the air. Jonah charged, revolver blazing. Eli swung out and fired. Jonah staggered back, clutching his side. "Coward!" Jonah spat, collapsing. Blood seeped dark in the moonlight. His voice rasped one last confession. Samuel knew land wasn't ours. Apache land. He threatened to tell. So we shut him up. Forever. His body slumped lifeless into the dirt. The truth hit like a hammer. Ruth's husband had been murdered. A fresh shot tore past Eli, grazing his arm. Out of the shadows stepped a different kind of man. Tailored coat, polished boots, revolver gleaming. A Pinkerton. "Eli Morgan," the agent drawled. The Carters paid me to clean up their mess. Bullets sparked off stone as the two clashed across the yard. The Pinkerton advanced with calm precision, each shot driving Eli back. Eli's rifle clicked empty. He braced for the end. Then a cry split the night. Apache riders burst from the ridge, horses thundering, rifles blazing. They swept through the ranch like a storm, scattering Carter men. The Pinkerton spun to fire but was struck in the arm, his revolver flying. Eli tackled him, fists hammering. They grappled in the dirt until Eli pinned him, rifle barrel at his chest. "Who hired you?" The agent coughed blood, smiling crookedly. "Not just the Carters. They sold the deed. Blackwood owns it now, and he'll kill you all to keep it." Rage surged through Eli. He smashed the man across the jaw, leaving him senseless. Around them, the Apache riders finished the fight. The Carter clan was broken. The ranch smoldered in ruin. One rider dismounted, eyes sharp. Coda, the boy Ruth once saved, now grown. "You fought well, Morgan," he said in rough English. "But this land remembers blood." Always Eli nodded, chest heaving. Then maybe it's time justice remembered too. The riders vanished back into the dark, leaving Eli in the smoking yard. Jonah's confession echoed. The Pinkertons' warning burned in his mind. The Carters were finished. But the true enemy had revealed himself. Blackwood. Ruth's land. Hannah's inheritance. Already stolen. Eli mounted his horse, blood drying on his sleeve, rifle across his back. The desert stars watched as he rode into the night, knowing the war had only just begun. The dawn after the battle bled red across the desert sky. Smoke curled from the Carter ranch, a black scar on the horizon. The prairie reeked of gunpowder, blood, and ash. Eli Morgan rode slow. Ruth and Hannah huddled silent in the wagon behind him. At the cabin, Ruth nearly collapsed. Eli steadied her, set her and the girl by the fire, coaxing warmth into the battered room. Ruth's hands trembled in her lap, her eyes hollow. At last she whispered, "I don't deserve this." Eli crouched. "Don't deserve what?" Her tears spilled. Safety. Kindness. You. I was beaten so long I believed them, that I was nothing. A curse. Even Samuel's death. They said it was my fault. And I believed it. I'm unworthy of love. The words cut deeper than bullets. Eli reached for her hands, voice firm. "Ruth Carter, look at me. You are not nothing. You are not cursed. You're the bravest soul I've known. You carried that child through hell, and you're still standing. That's strength, and you'll never stand alone again." "Not while I breathe." Her sobs broke free. She pressed his hand to her chest as if to anchor herself. In the corner, Hannah stirred, blinking at them. "Mama?" Ruth pulled her close, but Eli leaned near, his voice gentle. "Hannah, from this day on, you are my daughter. Blood don't matter. You are mine to protect, mine to love." The child hesitated, then reached her small hand to his cheek. "Papa," she whispered. The word shattered him. Tears burned his eyes as he pulled Ruth and Hannah into his arms, binding the three of them into something unbreakable. By midday, word spread through Ash Creek. Folks gathered as Eli harnessed his wagon, Ruth and Hannah seated inside. The whispers that once spat curses now fell silent. "That's her. The widow. With Morgan?" Faces tightened with judgment, but a few nodded, softer than before. Eli rode steady through town, Ruth upright beside him, Hannah clutching his hand. For the first time, they weren't hiding. They weren't running. They were free. At the town's edge, Eli paused. He looked out over the endless prairie, the vow heavy in his chest. Ruth and Hannah were his family now. Their fight was his. Their future is to guard. He clicked the reins. The wagon rolled toward the horizon, whispers fading into dust. Ahead lay danger, yes, but also hope. As the sun dipped low, Eli glanced at Ruth and Hannah and allowed himself a smile. On the frontier, blood made kin. But sometimes, love and courage made something stronger. Out here on the frontier, we've walked with Eli, Ruth, and little Hannah through fire, betrayal, and finally, healing. Their story reminds us that family isn't always bound by blood, but by love, courage, and the promise to never let go of one another. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Did it remind you of someone you've loved, or a time when you stood strong for family? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I read every word, and your stories mean more than you know. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe so you won't miss the next journey across the Wild West. And if you have a friend or loved one who might need a reminder that love is stronger than hardship, share this with them. Thank you for being here and for keeping these stories alive. Together, we keep the spirit of the West burning bright.